Hello, my name is Eliyahu Ungar-Sargon, and in this video, I'd like to look at a series of texts that shed light on the place of circumcision in the rabbinic development of Jewish conversion. My purpose here is to challenge preconceived ideas about circumcision and conversion, and to highlight some of the lesser-known opinions that existed in the early rabbinic period on this matter. Let's learn! Our first text comes from the Hebrew Bible, from Numbers chapter 15. The 5 books of Moses have roughly half a dozen layers that Bible scholars have identified, and each was composed by a different author at a different time over the course of centuries. Our passage comes from one of the later layers, known as the priestly layer, the same layer as it happens where we first learn about infant circumcision. The text we'll be looking at comes at the end of a series of rules that have to do with bringing sacrifices. Every citizen will do like this when presenting a fire offering of pleasing odor to God. And if a ger lives with you, or one who has been with you for generations, and he wishes to bring a fire offering of pleasing odor to God, as you do, so shall he do. For the congregation, there will be one law for you and for the ger who lives among you, a law forever for your generations. For you, as for the ger, it will be before God. One ritual and one law will be for you and for the ger who lives with you. Now, there's a lively scholarly debate about when the priestly text that this passage comes from was written. Some scholars date it to before the destruction of the First Temple in 586 BCE, and some place it centuries later. But what all scholars will agree on is the fact that the person who wrote this text was not familiar with the concept of conversion. In fact, what we can see here and elsewhere in the priestly text is a non-binary concept of Israelite identity. We have the citizen, the full Israelite, we have the ger, the sojourner, and we have the one who has been with you for generations. And, at least according to our text, all of these groups are welcome to bring sacrifices. In another part of the priestly layer, we learn that not only can a ger participate in these fire offerings, but they can even participate in the Passover sacrifice, the important annual springtime celebration of the Exodus from Egypt. And if a ger who lives with you would like to offer a Passover offering to God, surely circumcise every male in his household, and then he may come close to offer it, and he will be like a citizen of the land. But no uncircumcised male may eat of it. There shall be one law for the citizen and the ger who dwells among you. Before we get to our next text, which is from centuries later and in a galaxy far, far away from the priestly scribe, we need to just briefly talk about the invention of conversion. Conversion was a concept invented by a Hasmonean ruler named John Hyrcanus. Hyrcanus, also known in the Jewish tradition as Yochanan Kohen Gadol, because he was both the head of state and the high priest in the 2nd century BCE, inherited a small but independent Judean kingdom from his Maccabee ancestors and sought to expand its territory at the expense of the Seleucid Empire that ruled the region. In the process of his military push south, he encountered the Idumean people and offered them Judean citizenship on condition that they circumcise themselves and accept Jewish law. This move, which was inspired by Hellenistic ideas that had been percolating in the region for a couple of centuries, introduced the idea that a man who was not of Judean genealogy could become a Judean citizen through circumcision and an acceptance of the laws of Israel. It was a controversial idea at the time, and its introduction predated the rabbinic era by about a century. Our next text comes from the Tosefta, which is the part of the early rabbinic legislation that didn't make it into the Mishnah. This text is trying to get to the bottom of whether or not someone who accidentally violates Sabbath law is liable for a sin offering. To answer this question, the Tosefta poses a hypothetical situation in which it's plausible that the person in question wouldn't know the law. A convert who converts among the Gentiles and performs a forbidden labor on the Sabbath. Rabbi Akiva considers him liable, and Munbaz considers him exempt. What we see in this Tosefta is representative of the attitude that the rabbis had towards conversion at this time, namely that conversion is a practice that is implicitly accepted and that can even happen without Jewish supervision. At no time does our Tosefta question the validity of the conversion that it's imagining. The thought experiment wouldn't work if it did, right? The concern is entirely focused on the downstream effects of such an obviously legitimate conversion on Sabbath observance. I think it's fair to speculate based on this text and others like it that conversion was a mostly private affair in these days, but can we say anything from the tannaitic texts about the role of circumcision in conversion? To answer that question, we need to turn to two debates between the house of Shammai and the house of Hillel. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says, Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel did not disagree on the case of someone born circumcised that brit blood must be drawn from him, for he has a trapped foreskin. What they disagreed on was a convert who was already circumcised when he converted. Beit Shammai says that we need to draw brit blood from him, and Beit Hillel says that we do not. Again, we see that the rabbis are treating conversion as an existing practice that they accept. But here we get an interesting dispute between the rival schools of Hillel and Shammai. Some Jewish babies are born with a deformity of the penis in which there's literally no foreskin to circumcise. We learn in this text that in such a situation, Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai agree that blood must still be drawn from the infant's penis. But they disagree on whether a convert who's already circumcised must undergo a similar procedure as part of his conversion. Shammai says yes, and Hillel says no. And if we take this together with our next text, we can reconstruct a broader early rabbinic dispute on the place of circumcision in conversion. Rabbi Yossi says there are 6 instances of rulings where the house of Shammai were lenient and the house of Hillel were stringent. A convert who converted on Passover Eve, Beit Shammai say that he may dip in the ritual bath and eat the Passover offering that evening. And Beit Hillel say that one who separates himself from the foreskin is as one who separates himself from the grave. This poetic and rather difficult statement by Beit Hillel at the end of the Mishnah in Eduyot, which is repeated by the Mishnah in Pesachim, has fascinated scholars ever since it was committed to writing back in the 3rd century. What does it mean that one who separates himself from the foreskin is as one who separates himself from the grave? The only way I can make sense of this enigmatic statement is by surmising that for Beit Hillel, the actual moment of conversion occurs before the circumcision, and that in the twilight after the moment of conversion and before the circumcision, the convert's foreskin is like part of a dead body because it's the only thing left from his pre-conversion body. Therefore, when the convert cuts his foreskin off, he's literally separating himself from the last remnant of his now dead pre-conversion body. But for Beit Shammai, the actual moment of conversion is the circumcision. And so for them, there is no liminal twilight, and they don't worry about the more serious form of death impurity that would prevent a convert from eating the Passover sacrifice. Consistent with this reading, as we saw in the Tosefta, Beit Shammai requires that we draw blood from a convert who's already circumcised, and Beit Hillel do not. Our next text comes from the Sifri, which is written a century or so after the redaction of the Mishnah, and it's commenting on our first priestly text from Numbers 15. And if a ger lives with you. This only tells me of a ger who converted when the Israelites left Egypt. How do I know that the same applies to one who converts now? That's why the scripture says, or one who has been with you for generations. Rebbe says, just as with Israel, who we know only entered the covenant with 3 things, circumcision, immersion, and acceptance of the sacrifice offering, so the converts. The distance between the meaning of the original priestly text and our Midrash's interpretation of it is a reflection of the centuries of history that separate them. If in the original the ger was clearly and obviously a non-Israelite who could still participate in the religious and communal life of Israel, the rabbis of the Midrash retroject their concept of a convert back into the biblical text. The biblical ger becomes the rabbinic convert. Having no actual biblical history of conversion, because as we discussed, that was a later invention of John Hyrcanus, Rebbe constructs one out of the biblical formation story of the people of Israel. Everybody knows, he tells us, that the Jewish people entered into a covenant with God at Mount Sinai through 3 things: circumcision, immersion, and a sacrifice. Our verse in Numbers tells us that this is also how converts enter into the covenant. Rebbe's construction will serve as the basis for how the rabbis of the Talmud will view the requirements for converts going forward. But as we move to the Babylonian Talmud, we learn of another dispute that the early tannaitic rabbis had over the initiatory rites for converts. And this is the first time we learn of a rabbinic opinion that doesn't assume circumcision to be a required part of the conversion process. Our rabbis taught a convert who circumcised himself but did not immerse, Rabbi Eliezer says he is a convert, for so we find with our forefathers that they circumcised themselves but did not immerse themselves. If a convert immersed but did not circumcise himself, Rabbi Yoshua says he is a convert, for so we find with our foremothers that they immersed but did not circumcise themselves. But the sages say, one who immersed but did not circumcise, or circumcised but did not immerse, is not a convert until he both circumcises and immerses. Now, Talmud scholars will tell you that the authenticity of this Braita as a real tannaitic source is doubtful. They'll point to a parallel text in the Palestinian Talmud, a much earlier and more reliable witness, which has Rabbi Yoshua insisting on immersion in addition to circumcision. But if you read further, the Stam, the anonymous narrator of the Babylonian Talmud, actually doubles down on this view and logics himself into believing that even Rabbi Eliezer accepted converts without circumcision. Where he immersed himself but did not circumcise, everyone agrees that the conversion is effective. Where they disagree is if he circumcised but did not immerse. Rabbi Eliezer relies on the male Israelites at Sinai in saying that the conversion is valid, but Rabbi Yoshua maintains that the Israelite males, like their female counterparts, immersed themselves, so circumcision alone is insufficient. And a little further on, the Babylonian Talmud even gives us a third tannaitic opinion that doesn't require circumcision for conversion. It was taught in a Braita. One who comes and says, I circumcised myself, but I did not immerse myself. We immerse him for the sake of conversion, and the immersion suffices. These are the words of Rabbi Yehuda. If you're keeping score, that is now 3 weighty early rabbinic sources, according to the Bavli, who did not require circumcision for male converts. Our final text comes from the minor tractate of Gerim. It's difficult to date this text, and there hasn't been a lot of scholarship on it, but outside of Tractate Yevamot, this is the only other place in the Talmud where we get a description of a full conversion ceremony. One who wishes to convert, we don't accept him immediately. We say to him, what do you want with this conversion? Do you not see that this nation is debased and oppressed and degraded more than all other nations? That diseases and suffering come on them, and they bury their children and grandchildren, that they are killed for their practice of circumcision and immersion and all the other commandments, and they cannot hold their heads up in public like all other nations. If he says, I am not worthy, we dismiss him and he goes on his way. If, however, he still accepts it upon himself, we take him down to the place of immersion and cover him up until the place of his nakedness, and we explain a few of the finer points of the commandments so that he will give gleanings, forgotten sheaves, the corners of the fields, and tithes. As they say to a man, so they say to a woman, so that she will be careful in the laws of menstruation and lighting the Shabbat candles. When he has immersed, he comes up, and we say nice and encouraging things to him. Do you know to whom you are cleaving? Happy are you. It is to the one who spoke and the world came into being. For the world was only created for Israel, and only Israel are called the children of God, and only Israel are beloved to God. And all the things that we said to you were only said to increase your reward. There's a lot going on in this text, but the mention of persecution for circumcision probably places it in Palestine. We have no evidence that the communities in Babylon ever had any restrictions imposed on them with regards to circumcision. But wherever and whenever we want to place this text, it's remarkable that in contrast to its parallel in Yevamot, the procedure of circumcision is just not part of the conversion ceremony. What we've demonstrated here today is that the rabbis took many centuries to construct their version of Jewish conversion. It was a practice that they had inherited from John Hyrcanus, and so they needed to reach back into the people of Israel's biblical formation story to retroactively justify their innovations. Whether we can rely historically on the Babylonian Talmud's account or not, we can definitely say with confidence that the question of which initiatory rites were necessary for conversion was not settled law before the Amoraic period. and as far as the Babylonian Talmud is concerned, there were 3 important tannaitic authorities who accepted converts without circumcision. Having said all that, it would take until 1893 before the requirement of circumcision for converts would once again be challenged in Jewish law by Isaac Wise and the early reformers. A challenge which, as we have shown, would find support in the weighty tannaitic opinions that do not require circumcision for male converts, along with an even broader chorus of Jewish legal opinions that do not consider circumcision to be an essential part of the conversion process. If you like what you've seen here, please support our work at Bruchim, where we advocate for an open and welcoming reception of Jews who think differently about the rite of circumcision. Thank you for your attention.